So this week we are looking at how creativity shows up in our world work. The work we have of manifesting the vision of Centers for Spiritual Living, which is to create that world that works for everyone and all of creation. And so as we all know, our world has been under the grip of a global pandemic for the last 3 years. In fact, it is this time 3 years ago when our world began to shut down, where people were forced to isolate, where the streets were empty and the shelves in the stores were barren. I think it's important that we sometimes take a moment and pause to reflect on everything that we've been through in the last 3 years, and on the amazing resilience of our human species to adapt, to face a crisis and meet it head on, and to find a vein of strength we probably didn't even know that existed within each and every one of us. The pandemic affected us in similar ways, but I would venture to say that our experience of it was unique to each and every one of us. You know, I loved all the different creative ways people found to come together over the distances, through online chats, through Zoom calls, through FaceTime, Skype, all different computer modalities, and even just talking to each other from a distance over a fence, keeping that, 12 feet apart from each other. From balcony to balcony, as they were doing in Italy when the pandemic first started, we would see the people visiting with their neighbors on their balconies. And I remember seeing people sitting 20 to 25 feet apart from each other in parks and just having a conversation. They had to speak a little louder, didn't quite have the intimacy, but they made it possible. There was the creativity out there to make it possible to meet the need for our connection with each other. And our own creative aspects of our human nature allowed us to find a way when it didn't seem a way was possible. And because the world was moving at a slower pace during this time, people found ways to engage in creativity that they never took the time to do before. I enjoyed so much seeing on Facebook the pictures of people recreating masterpieces of art in their own homes out of the supplies they had on hand, turbans and toilet paper and scepters with kitchen spoons and things like that. It was fascinating to watch that. And I loved to watch the families getting together to sing songs and then putting that out on Facebook. It was really quite amazing to see the creativity coming through for people during this time of trauma. I loved watching people who could cook a fabulous meal with just the ingredients that they had on hand, something that was available to them. Really, really sparking their creativity and their cooking skills. And it was really interesting to see what kind of craft supplies that were no longer available because everyone was trying their hand at them. The sewing, the knitting, the crocheting, and all of the other different crafts. I myself had thought I might get back into quilting. I used to quilt years ago and had given away my sewing machine. But I went to buy a new sewing machine and found out that they were not going to be available for over 4 months because every single sewing machine had been bought. I couldn't even find an expensive one to buy. So it was quite amazing to watch what was popular and what wasn't popular. And I guess I wasn't the only one who thought it was a good time to take up sewing and crafting because things were just going off the shelves like crazy or out of Amazon. You couldn't even buy them there. And I also marveled at the way that people and communities came together to support each other. At the start of the pandemic, I was living in St. George, Utah. And within days of the lockdown, a Facebook group popped up that was set up to share resources. So people with extra toilet paper or paper towels were posting it there. And they were bartering or giving it away, depending on what the other person's needs were. There were people who needed things and they were asking for them, like somebody needed baby formula and they were sending out a request for that. All different kinds of supplies were being advertised and traded on this Facebook page as people were going through this time. Then they found ways to safely get them to each other. But what was so cool about it was that the supplies were actually getting to the people who needed them right then and right then. So now we're pretty much on the other side of this pandemic, and we're now looking at how to be in this, now that this imminent threat has dissipated somewhat. I hear people say, I just can't wait to get back to normal. I just can't wait for things to get back to normal. I'm not really sure we're ever going to get back to normal because I'm not sure what normal actually is. I suppose there are people who can recreate the life they had before the pandemic and make it work in their life now and feel like they have some semblance of normal with them. But my guess is that there are a lot of people who, after living through this 3-year experience, have decided that the world prior to the pandemic really didn't work for them the way it was. We hear phrases on the news and in the media that we read about the workforce, things like the Great Resignation or quietly quitting, and which are both indications that the way people lived their lives prior to the pandemic are no longer satisfactory for whatever reason. They are no longer satisfied trading their life energy in the form of work for things that don't fulfill them. And so again, this great resignation, this quietly quitting, these are definite signs that people are not wanting to go back to normal, go back to the way things were, because the way things weren't really working for them, and it took the break from that to really see that that's what was happening. And I'm sure that 10 years from now, the people who study such things will have all kinds of interesting reasons for it. It'll be fascinating to see what our world becomes in 10 years because of what we've experienced for the last 3. In his book, Surviving Storms, author Mark Nepo says that when we are in a situation where things have broken down, there are always 3 questions that we are called to ask ourselves. What needs to be repaired? What needs to be reimagined? And what needs to be left dismantled? I think that in asking these questions and then looking at a creative solution to the situation, to what comes through when we ask the question, we can begin to get clear about where our work is. When something breaks down, it is our human nature to instantly want to repair it. I think it seems easier to want to fix something than it is to let it remain broken and try to find a new solution. I remember how it was and feeling comfortable with the familiarity of it, and we want to keep that. We remember that comfortable feeling that our knowledge of how things were brought to us. And so when it's broken, we want to get that feeling back instead of trying to create a new way of doing it because that's unknown. It can be very scary finding new ways of doing things that we are familiar with. To reimagine how things should work, how life should flow, and how I'll get my needs met takes us into the unknown. And unless we're open to using our innate creativity to find unique solutions, then the fear can be overwhelming. And it's even scarier than that to reimagine what can be is the idea of leaving something dismantled, never to be that way again. That can be quite frightening. The what ifs take hold and they run rampant in our thoughts until we begin to imagine all kinds of awful scenarios in which things are going to happen because we've left this thing broken and we're not fixing it and it's not going to be the same way that it was. And it just begins this whole cycle of fear. So many things in our world right now feel like they've been turned upside down, that they've been broken, or maybe even that they've been taken away from us. We are in a period of time in our world where there are so many things still unknown. It's not the first time we've been here, but I think it's probably the first time that the entire world was aware of it and affected by it to this great degree. In the Middle Ages, we had a plague that killed 30 to 50% of the entire population of Europe. And then in my grandparents' early years, the Spanish influenza killed about 500 million people, or 1/3 of the world's population at that time. Or they not necessarily killed, but they certainly became infected by the virus. 1/3 of the world's population was affected by the Spanish influenza. By contrast, it was about 700 million people in the world that have been diagnosed with COVID-19 in 2020 and 2021. That's only about 10% of the world's population. Big difference from what happened with the Spanish influenza. But we knew about it. The entire world knew about it. They didn't know about it all so much with Spanish influenza because the technology wasn't there to communicate it. And as we know that with our experience of COVID-19, even if you didn't become ill with the disease, you certainly were affected by it. Our world has been shaken, and it's time for us to find creative solutions to how we move forth from its effect. We have a grand opportunity right now to begin to create a world that works better for everyone. Mark Nepo says this in his book, "At least once in every generation or two, humanity remakes itself, such as we are right now. And such a remaking is both profound and painful." You know, one of the things I love most about our philosophy and our spiritual practices that we have here at Centers for Spiritual Living is that they encourage us to experiment. And being a former science teacher, I can really get into that. I love to take a challenge, to take a problem, and look at it from the point of view of, what if I tried to do it this way? What if I chose this solution instead of going right to my old way of handling things? To use Mark Nepo's term, what if I reimagined a new solution? What might my experience be then? Now this gets my creative juices flowing. This puts me into the flow of divine possibility that is always wanting to express itself. You know, within the grand scheme of life, infinite possibilities exist. So why do I feel the need to keep trying to do things the same old way and getting the same results? Each one of us has an opportunity as we move into the next months and the next years of our life here on earth to look at the ways that we can create a world that not only works for us, but is also a benefit and a blessing to others around us, a benefit and a blessing to our community, to our connection in the world. We were not created in isolation, and we are not meant to live in isolation. So why do we think our solution should only be for ourselves? Mark Nepo puts it this way: we are called to recreate the universe by choosing love over fear, by choosing interdependence over self-interest, by choosing care over brutality. And so ultimately, everything we do matters. This is a grand opportunity to experiment and to see what kind of a world we can create. The old world worked well for some people, better for others, and worse for some. But everything that we do matters, and everything that we do is leading to creating the next experience of this world. What if we could balance that out so that each and every being on earth, not just the human beings, but every being, is living its life to its full potential, reveling in those infinite possibilities that exist as a unique incarnation of the divine in this time, in this space? This is our world work, and this is why we've come here to earth. So let's take this into prayer, into our spiritual mind treatment, where we acknowledge the presence of the divine, we unify ourselves with it, we speak words of truth, we give thanks, and we let it go. So if you would with me, turn within. I do this by closing my eyes and focusing on my breath. And from this place of centered connection, I know that there is only one thing happening. And that is the action and the activity of that universal, creative love intelligence that has brought forth everything into existence, that is the substance and the fullness and the allness of all creation. I know that nothing exists outside of this one. I know that this one shows up as unconditional love, as perfect peace, as divine right order and harmony. I know that this infinite intelligence is fully manifesting itself in, through, and as all creation. I know that each and every one of us is one with it. And therefore I know that I am one with it. That all that universal love intelligence is resides right at the heart of my being. And because I know this is true for me, I know this is true for everyone. That each one of us is that perfect emanation of the divine spirit right here and right now. And I know that each one of us is that presence of love and peace. And I know that divine right order is flowing through each and every one of us right here and right now. And so knowing this, I speak my word of truth. I know that each one of us is a creative outlet for the expression of the divine, that each one of us exists in infinite possibilities, and that those possibilities are welling up within us and pouring forth from us in all that we are and all that we do. I know that each one of us here is a gift, a benefit, and a blessing to our entire world. And I know that as we experience this connectedness, this universal flow of infinite possibility moving through us, then magnificent things are pouring forth from us in the most amazing ways. I see this happening in our community. I see it happening in the lives of the people around me, and I know that this is the truth of our being. And so I just give great thanks for this knowing. I'm so grateful to feel it, to see it in action, to know it is happening right here and right now. And I release this word into that law that always says yes, knows no lack or limitation, and is constantly unfolding itself in perfection and wholeness. I let it be and I let it go. And so it is. Amen.